to dinner before the concert, the guy sitting across from us had a pro Palestinian hat on, and I'm wearing a Jewish star. I'm like, oh, crap.
Palestine love. Like, as I didn't have to snatch on so thank you for not getting Palestine.
I was so tempted to take his hat off and throw it in the garbage. I can't even begin to tell you. He almost wore the IVF shirt. I was like, yeah, that would have been real interesting.
Good. All right, we'll pick back up on page 16, chapter 3. Some copies up here, pens and paper. Welcome, everybody. Just a few brief announcements. So next Sunday, good day. Why you schlepping? No schlepping allowed. I know why you're schlepping, but it's good to see you. Next Sunday is Tisha B'Av, which is the day that we commemorate the destruction of the temples. It's a fast day. It's the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. We actually don't study Torah because Torah brings joy. So we will not have Kabbalah and coffee. We also don't eat on top of everything else. So no bagels and coffee. So it's hard to do coffee and Kabbalah and coffee without the coffee and the Kabbalah. You are invited Saturday night. We read the Book of Lamentations. We'll have a video presentation, the Commandant of Auschwitz, and then Sunday morning, late morning, we'll be reading and studying together from the Kinos, which are prayers of Lamentations, kind of putting historical context on that. And then late in the afternoon, we'll be showing a video related to the real roots of anti-Semitism, and then we'll break the fast. The following Sunday, August 10th, I'm out of town, but we have a guest speaker. Some of you have heard him teach before, Rabbi Mendel Edelman. He's going to do the Kabbalah and Coffee class, followed by a short presentation about his book called Precipice, The Difference Between Fanaticism and Religious Zealousness, a very interesting book. And then he'll be doing a book signing. So you got those little things on the table here, and I'll send out, of course, text messages. Whoever is not on our texting list, please leave your phone number and name with me at the end of the class so I can add you so you're ahead of the game. All right, chapter 3, I'm going to jump in. For those of you that are here for the first time, we'll fill in the gaps as we go along. Topic we are discussing is faith in God versus knowing God. These are two separate commandments, to know God and to believe in God. And let's jump in. V'niksiv shchan eretz ure'ei emunah. In the book of Psalms, it says, dwell in the land and nourish the faith. What does it mean to nourish faith? Perish ure'ei, mefarnes. Mefarnes means to sustain. Shetzarach lefarnes ulahamshich mazain lahagdalas emunah. Just like a person needs food and coffee, bagels and coffee, in order to sustain themselves and grow, as well as other healthy foods. Similarly, faith needs nurturing. It needs food to feed it. What do we need to feed it for? So that the faith is implanted in one's heart, not just in an abstract faith manner, but in a manner that one achieves knowing and feeling as if one sees it. So just to recap a little bit what this means, the idea of knowing God, the idea of knowledge is not intellectual, it's experiential. When one knows something, you feel it. It's part and parcel with who you are. And the Alter Rebbe, the author of this discourse, established that because our souls see God, so they know God, right? When you look out the window and you see the tree there, you don't have to believe that the tree is there, you know it. And if I ask you, how do you know it? You're going to tell me, because I see it. knowing it's a given. It's part and parcel. You feel this awareness that there's a tree there. Because our souls see God, our souls know God. There's no question for the soul that God is. That's the meaning of knowledge. When one has knowledge about something, then faith is not the appropriate term to refer to that. We believe in something that we can't know. Now, even though our knowledge of God, it belongs to the soul, we have the ability, by scratching the surface, by moving away the external layers, to get to that place of knowing. The easiest way to demonstrate this is if you ever spent Yom Kippur in the synagogue, you know God. You don't have to put any effort into that. The day of Yom Kippur is a holy day. It's a very, God's presence, according to the Kabbalists, is more manifest on Yom Kippur. So there's less barriers. The fasting and the other prohibitions of Yom Kippur help us get to that feeling. It helps peel away those layers, which is maybe spiritually one of the reasons that we fast. When the body's broken down a little bit, when we're not indulgent in our food needs and so on, it's easier to access that underlying dimension of faith that exists within the soul. Now, you don't have to enter into that kind of experience in order to get there. One can do that through study, through meditation. We have other opportunities of spiritual experiences where we encounter God and we know that God is there. Maybe this is not a great example, but it's one that I remember. I remember this young man who once called me up, and he was telling me how he saw a UFO, and there was nothing I was going to say that was going to convince him otherwise, right? The greatest rational explanation, that he must have had a bad dinner the night before, wasn't going to help him change his knowledge that he saw a UFO, period. Because he saw something and he was convinced in the very essence of his being that he saw a UFO. When one has a spiritual experience, you're not going to convince them out of it. They experience something. I actually have a good friend, very fascinating story. He showed up at my house many years, probably 1999. He and his wife had a child who was born with a terminal illness, and immediately after the child was born, the child was in a perpetual state of a coma, and they spent the 6 months of the child's life until the child passed away in the NICU, just standing guard. And he was a very secular, very disconnected, very skeptical believer. And he tells me that one day, so he shows up at my house this night for some Torah study, and he told me that he was sitting next to, this was not long after his child passed away, that he was sitting next to his child's bed, and the child opened his eyes for a second, and he said that in that second he saw God. And it changed his life. He's not an observant individual by any stretch of the imagination, but his relationship with God is very real, because he saw something there that no one can convince him out of it. So knowing God is a function of seeing. Faith is a different dimension. Faith is something that we don't see, we don't know, but we believe in. Therefore, it requires effort, right? In our above mentioned examples, there's no effort to have that knowledge when you have it. When you see something, you know it. But when you're believing something, you have to nurture that faith. You got to feed it. Regarding this, it tells us in the prophet of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, it says that in the Messianic era, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. Here the Alter Rebbe is going to break down the specific words here. Why does it say earth? And why does it specifically say knowledge? So Pirush ha'aretz hi amunish nikras b'shem eretz, she ha'madrega ha'tachtoina, she'ein ba gili el amunah bovad. So in general, heaven and earth represents the sky and the physical reality, but it also represents a spiritual dimension. Heaven represents that which is abstract, that which we can't touch, which we can't know. Earth represents our immediate consciousness. So the prophet is telling us that the earth, our conscious experience of the divine, will be at the level of knowledge. We will know in our physical, seemingly otherwise concealed reality, we will have knowledge of God, we will feel the presence of God. We also discussed earlier in the discourse that there's two dimensions, there's two relationships that we have with God. One is God as he fills existence, where he takes every creature into account and nurtures each creature according to their specific needs. And then there's God as he encompasses the consciousness, where God encompasses the consciousness. That means there's an abstract relationship. One is very personal, one is abstract. So when we say that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, that means that our conscious, our immanent relationship with God will be on the level of knowledge, meaning even that seemingly otherwise abstract relationship with God, we will experience it in a format of knowledge. Why is that? Why will it be then as such? Page 17. This comes from the book of Kabbalah Sefer Yetzirah, and it tells us there that the beginning is wedged in the end. That's a general rule about really everything in life, that if you want to know what is the original intent, look at the end result. Right? We gave the analogy of a person who builds a home. So if you're ignorant to home building, maybe even if you're ignorant to homes, right? You see somebody laying a foundation. You say, oh, they're making a nice patio. Then you see the walls starting to come up. You say, oh, maybe they're making a monument, right? And then eventually they put the sheetrock and the electric and the plumbing, and then they bring in the furniture, and then the person sits down and sits on his couch, and you say, oh, that was the purpose. The purpose was that a person could have a place where they can be at home, they can express themselves, and so on and so forth. So if you want to know the intent in something, look at the end. The beginning means the beginning of the soul, the beginning of the journey of the soul gets expressed not in the heavens. The beginning of the journey of the soul gets expressed in the soul's manifestation in the physical reality. And because the soul is put into a human being, which is an intellectual being, the ultimate goal is that the highest spiritual manifestation expresses itself in the most physical dimension of the human being, which is their physical consciousness. That in that dimension of the physical human being, they have a connection to the highest manifestation of the divine. Does this make sense? Yes. Thank you. So when nobody asks any questions or comments, either I did a great job or a terrible job. So I'll go a little further in the concept. So the deepest dimension of the soul. So we know that the soul has 5 dimensions. 3 of them are manifest in the human consciousness. They're known as nefesh, ruach, and neshama. They all mean soul in different ways, but literally nefesh means the life force, ruach means the spirit, neshama means the soul. These 3 dimensions of the soul manifest themselves in the human consciousness, in the human emotion, human action, human speech, human experience. The higher 2 dimensions of the soul are known as chaya and yechida, which means life and oneness or singularity. The highest dimensions of the soul, the yechida, is this dimension of the soul that's one with God. Where does that dimension get manifest? Where does the highest dimension of the soul get manifest? You would think it gets manifest in the heavenly spheres, in the spiritual worlds. The Sefer Yetzirah tells us that the highest dimension of the soul gets manifest in the lowest expression. Just like our analogy of the house, if you want to know what is the inner intent, look at the end. Look in the most physical, most mundane. Put in other words, if God had this project to create a universe, why did he create the universe? You're not going to find the answer in heaven, because that's not the end of the journey. The end of the journey is this physical reality. This is where God, because if this wasn't the end of the game, then God would never have created. It would have stopped with the spiritual realms. So the fact that God created a physical universe, and by all accounts, the physical universe is lower spiritually than the spiritual dimensions. So this is where God's intent was. This is where God's agenda is. And within the physical reality, you got to go to the lowest place. What's the agenda? What's God's objective in this project? It's to bring the highest into the lowest. If that's not the purpose, then again, the project doesn't need this dimension. If your objective is to make money, right? There's actually in business, a lot of businesses fail is because they go down other paths that were not the original intent for the business. People start a business and they see that other product lines are doing well, so they begin to diversify. And then oftentimes where they diversify, it actually sucks the cash flow out of the business and the business falls apart. Why? Because their intention wasn't that other product line. But because they got excited about something, they had a divergence, it killed the business. You got to stay focused. What's the agenda? What are we trying to accomplish here? If God's agenda is to bring the highest manifestation into the lowest, so then it's in the lowest that God gets manifest. That ability to bring that manifestation into the lowest has to belong to intellectual beings, because the animals can't do that. The trees can't do that. The trees themselves don't have the ability to choose to manifest the divine. Animals don't. Vegetation doesn't. Inanimate objects don't. Only the human being has the ability to, through their efforts, through their thoughts, through their speech, through their actions, to bring a consciousness of the divine into this physical reality. So where is the greatest expression of the divine manifest? Here in this physical reality. And that's what our effort is. First, to know God, meaning to uncover the dimension of seeing that our soul already has, right? If we take a moment and think about the fact that in each one of us, there is a soul that has this inherent relationship with God, that has this knowledge of God, and we peel away the surface, we're going to come to connect on some level with that dimension of soul. So we will know God, but that's not enough, because that comes easy on some level. The greater effort is to bring faith of God into our consciousness. We use the analogy of the Talmud has a passage that says that a thief, when it's standing at the door of its of his or her prey, right? That person turns to God and says, "God, please help me be successful at this robbery." Right? So what do you have? Or you have, on the one hand, you have the person who has faith. They're believing in God. That's why they're praying to God. But their belief is abstract, because they're still willing to sin even as they're believing in God. So that's faith, but not knowledge. The goal is to take that faith and bring it into a place of knowledge, to bring that into our consciousness. In the Messianic era, that will be completed. Like we quoted a verse from the prophet, that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of God means that our experience in this physical reality will have the greatest manifestation of God, but in a level of knowledge. Is that a little better? Mm-hmm. Any questions, comments, discomforts?
Talking about how it comes together at the end, and it's more clear that could be said for death too.
Say more.
Well, that when people die, their soul, I've seen a number of people go through this, and at the end, they become energetic and alive, even though their body is really, really sick, their soul takes over. And when they go through the process of death, I read a lot about that. They get in touch with God at that moment, so that it becomes very real then.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Great. Any other comments or questions? Discomfort? Page 18. This level of simple faith, which the Alter Rebbe is calling earth, meaning earth on the one hand represents the physicality, the most mundane, but it also represents a simplicity. This level of faith that is called earth will be Moladea, will be filled with knowledge. Shatia bebechinas hakara v'argasha, it will be experienced. There will be a recognition, there will be a perception, there will be a feeling of the presence of God, uki'ilu raya, as if one sees. I actually like your example of death, because I think it also emphasizes this point, right? What happens when a person is getting close to the end? So the things that are really true and important in life rise to the surface. What happened? Their whole life, it wasn't important, now it became important. There's a simplicity that's at the core that rises to the top. It doesn't need explanation at that point. Faith, this higher dimension of faith, this what's called simplistic faith, this higher consciousness, becomes experienced in a very real way. In a very real way, as real as the tree is outside, as real as the sky is outside, as real as our awareness that we're alive. We feel it, we experience it. The verse says, and all flesh, God will be, the glory of God will be revealed, and all flesh will see together that it is the word of Hashem that is speaking. Why is it called all flesh? The reason why it's called all flesh is because it's talking about an experiential level. It's not even emotional. It's just as our flesh is real to us, so too the awareness of God, the faith in God will be so real to us as if we know. Now, so that's the principle. Our job now is to nurture this faith, to sustain it, to feed it. How do we feed it? How do you feed faith? So the Alter Rebbe tells us, we do this through the study of Torah and the fulfillment of God's commandments. Shaleim Nemar, regarding which it says, Naase Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmusenu, God says, let us make man in our image and our likeness. So what we're going to do now is explore how it is that studying Torah and fulfilling God's commandments brings us into a place of deeper faith. And we're going to do that by explaining the meaning of this verse that says when God created the world, on the sixth day of creation, it says, Naase Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmusenu, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Let's not get stuck on the hour. That's something that the commentaries tell us, that God consulted with the heavenly court in order to demonstrate that he doesn't rule by fiat. He engages with others. There's a lot of midrash about that, but we'll leave that alone for right now. The main thing we want to focus on is the concept that God is saying that he creates man in his image and his likeness. What does it mean that, what kind of image and likeness does God have that we are created in? So the human being has 248 primary organs, and we have 365 passageways, arteries, veins, sinews, and so on. And the Kabbalah tells us that the 248 organs, which correspond to the 248 positive commandments in the Torah, there are 613 commandments in the Torah, the 248 positive commandments represent and parallel the 248 organs of the body, and the 365 negative commandments correspond to the veins and arteries and sinews. Spiritually, God also has We got to be delicate, right? Because we don't want to anthropomorphize the divine. God also has 248 organs and 365 veins and arteries. Your question?
Yeah, is there a direct relation between this certain 248 and the organs? Like, is there one specific
Yes.
for each?
Yes, there is one specific one. There are books of Kabbalah that explore the relationships between certain commandments, but let's just give an example, right? We don't have to go too far to stretch that. You have, let's say, the mitzvah of tefillin, right, which we wrap on our arm. So we see right away it's being placed on the arm. So there's a correspondence to the arm. We have the head tefillin, which is placed on the head. It corresponds to the head. The study of Torah is done with the brain or with the mouth. So there's a correspondence there. The mitzvah of shaking the lulav and etrog on Sukkot. The lulav represents the spine. The esrog represents the heart. So we have certain parallels. Again, I don't know that any of us have the ability to draw a specific inference, but there's also another interesting parallel, and that is that sometimes people are struggling with certain illnesses. This was surely true with the Rebbe, but even other great leaders in the past. And I think I mentioned this story recently. I think it was at Kabbalah and Coffee, where this was probably 1950 or 1951. I think it was before the Rebbe officially accepted leadership. And there was an individual who came to the Rebbe's synagogue, and he was very distraught. And one of the yeshiva students said, "What's going on?" He said, "My daughter's not well. She had this mysterious illness." So the student said, "Why don't you ask the Rebbe what to do?" So he asks the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to him, "You should start keeping kosher and keeping Shabbos." The guy said, "Listen, that's a big ask. Maybe I'll start a little bit." So the Rebbe got very serious, and he said, it's not a negotiation. I'm not like, you asked me what you need to do for your daughter. I'm telling you, this is what you need to do. It's not, this is the channel, right? This is the connection point. The connection point is clogged. It's blocked up. If you want to open up that channel, you got to take these actions, and things will flow. So it's just what it is. It's not personal. Like, if it was up to me, we can negotiate whatever you'd like, but it's not a negotiation, right? So we see that concept. We see that with the mezuzah oftentimes. Again, let's not look at this like somebody doesn't have a kosher mezuzah, so therefore God's striking them down. It's not that way. For whatever reason, certain people have greater sensitivities to certain mitzvahs, and therefore, if the channels are not open, it doesn't flow. Okay, so there is that parallel.
So he observed the Shabbos?
Yes.
And
And his daughter recovered. Yeah. I mean, there are many such stories in different formats. Here's another interesting one. How many teeth are there? You can count if you like. No, just kidding. It's 32 teeth. 32 teeth. So it was a person who had problems with their teeth, and they asked the Rebbe for a blessing. The Rebbe said, "Start wearing tzitzits." Tzitzis has 32 strings. There are 4 corners, 8 strings each. So the Rebbe said, "Start wearing tzitzis." And it worked. Again, it's not a magic trick. It's certain people don't wear tzitzis and they don't have problems with their teeth, right? Doesn't work the other way, right? Sometimes people have blockages and they need to open up the channels. But the idea is that mitzvahs are a channel. Torah study is a channel, which we'll elaborate on in a moment. But I want to share one other thing first. And that is that I have also mentioned this recently, that you have, what is the function of, who is the person, right? If I ask you, what is the physical makeup? What makes your body into a body? You're going to say my heart, my brain, my kidneys, my liver, my legs, my arms, right? You're not going to say what makes my body is my veins and sinews. Of course, it also makes up the body, but that's not what defines the body. What defines the body is our major organs. And by the way, how do you take care of your organs? You have to take positive action. Heart health requires that you take care of your heart. Take fish oil, your brain's going to be okay, right? Exercise, your legs will be okay. What is the function of the veins and arteries? It's to move blood from one place, oxygenated blood around the body. How do you take care of your veins and sinews? By not creating blockages. Right? That's how you do it. It's the knots. It's the thou shalt nots that allow your veins and arteries to continue to function healthily because you don't create interference. So the positive commandments, the 248 positive commandments, which creates the relationship, correspond to the organs. The 365 negative commandments, the thou shalt nots, prevent the flow from becoming blocked. That's why they correspond to 248 and 365. Get this? Okay. So now, what we need to understand is, what does this mean when we're talking about God? How does God have 248 organs and 365 veins and arteries? God's not a human being. Maimonides tells us that God has no form whatsoever. And if you suspect that God has any form, it's a denial of God's oneness and so on and so forth. So what does that mean? So I'm sorry, before we go there, the second line on the page, it says that the word for human or man is Adam. What does the word Adam mean? Adam comes from the Hebrew word domeh, which means likeness. It says that a person is Adam le'elyon, a person is in the likeness of the divine. So what is the likeness? These are the 248 flows, the 248 divine manifestations of light that come from the abstract dimension of the divine, known as Sovev Kolaman, the encompassing light of the divine. So God's encompassing light, we're not going to say God's essential light, because it's not necessarily God's essence, but it's a manifestation of God. So God's light that gets manifest, manifests itself in 248 flows. Which means that God becomes invested in the divine light that he manifests into our universe. And that light is manifested in 248 flows, which show up for us as the 248 positive commandments. Which means that if we want to access divine light, we got to plug into the channel. How do we plug into the channel? We plug into the channel by, if I want to put coffee in a cup, it's got to be a cup that can hold coffee. If it's a cup that is designed for straining pasta, it's not going to hold the coffee because it's not designed for that channel. And if it's a flat cup, we call that a plate, it's not going to be able to hold the coffee either, right? So you've got to plug the right vessel, the right receptacle into the right channel of light. Let's go a step deeper. What is the Torah and what is divine commandment? We follow it back up to its source. Why is it that we put a mezuzah on the door? Anybody? It says in the Shema. So why? So what do you tell me more? It says in the Shema, and therefore what? What does that have to do with God?
To remind us of God, that he's in our home.
So that's the reason that God said to put the mezuzah. But what is the act of mezuzah itself accomplishing vis-a-vis God? It's not a complicated answer. I don't want you to overthink it. You said it says in the Shema, and therefore what? Why should we do it? No, good. Why should we do it? We'll work this through here. Why should we do it?
Keep you connecting to God, and it's also by security.
Okay, that's the benefit of of doing it. But what the act itself, you're on the right track. Go ahead. That's the accomplishment. Give me the core of it. You're on the right track, Claire. It says in the Shema, and therefore what? Who cares what it says in the Shema? A commandment. And what is a commandment? If you're the commander, what does that mean? It's an instruction. Why would you give someone an instruction? Before you get to the good for us, why do you give someone an instruction? Even before you get to the connection, why do you give an instruction to someone? If I go and I say, hey, can you wash my car? I command you, wash my car. Why do I want, what is it about my car? Why is this act important? I won't torture you anymore. Because I want my car clean. Who cares why I want my car clean? I want my car clean. It's something that I want, right? It's a desire. I want my car clean. I want you to put a mezuzah on your door. I want you to light Shabbos candles. I want you to keep kosher. I want you to wrap tefillin. It's what God wants. By the way, some of you have been attempting to give answers for the mezuzah. There are many commandments that don't have answers, don't have reasons for them. They're called decrees. So if the only reason we're doing a mitzvah is because it has a reason, what do we do with those mitzvahs that don't have a reason? We don't do them because they have a reason. We may be looking for divine connection, but that's not the ultimate. The reason we do a mitzvah is because God commanded it. God wants us to do this mitzvah. So what is a mitzvah? The mitzvah is God's desire. God has wants, and his want is manifest in the 613 commandments. So when we fulfill God's commandments, we're doing what God wants. If you've ever been married, or if you are married, and your wife asks you to do something, and you say why, you're already not connecting on an essential level. It doesn't make a difference why. I want, but you're going to start rationalizing why your want doesn't make sense. It doesn't change the reality. If you want to fulfill the desires of your spouse, or if you want to fulfill the desire of God, you do what God wants. Now, that doesn't mean we're beings that don't use our brains. And in fact, there are certain commandments that the Torah gave with reason because God wants us to incorporate the reason into it. But in the same vein, there are commandments that God gave us that don't have reason. And that's a messaging for us that the way we fulfill the commandments that have reason is the same way we fulfill the commandments. The same way we fulfill the commandments that have reason should be on the same level of how we fulfill the commandments that don't have reason. It's about doing what God wants. So that's mitzvah. Now, once we've established that, we can now venture out to some other things. The word mitzvah in Aramaic comes from the root word tzavsa, which means connection. So when we do a mitzvah, we create a connection with the divine. And the particular mitzvah, as we discussed, becomes a receptacle, a channel to receive the divine light. But more important than all of that is tapping into the essence of God. Within the human experience, and we use the human as a microcosm in Olam Katan, in Kabbalah, in the Medrash, we use the human being in order to reflect a mirror on the divine. My favorite analogy is a mirror, a literal mirror, right? You look in the mirror and you're looking at a piece of glass, but it reflects to us the divine. So if we want to connect with God's essence, we have to look at ourselves because we're created in the likeness of God. So we have action, we have speech, we have emotion, we have intellect. The highest expression, the highest dimension of the human experience is desire. How do I know that? Where does your emotion live? Don't be shy. Where does emotion live? Where in your body does emotion live? In your heart. Where does your action live? your hands, your legs. Where does intellect live? Where does desire live? Does it?
Yes, heart.
Which one?
Shares.
So we feel it oftentimes in the gut and in the heart, but desire actually lives everywhere. It doesn't have a specific home. And it says in Kabbalah that that's the reason why when we want something, your heart actually can be in conflict with what you want. Your gut can be in conflict with what you want, with what you desire. Desire has the power to compel any component of the body to do its wishes. And it does it instantly, without even thinking. Desire lives in the totality of the person. It doesn't have a specific home because it's more abstract. So when we do a mitzvah, we're connecting, because it's God's desire, we are connecting through that act with this dimension of the divine known as desire, this level that transcends all of it. So that's mitzvah. The other channel, which he mentioned, is Torah. Okay, let's do the same thing with Torah. What is Torah? Who wants to be the guinea pig today? Go ahead. You're up, God. Okay, is that all? There's a lot of Torah that's not instruction. History, there's still a lot of Torah that's not history. There's instruction. There's prophecy. So we got prophecy, instruction, history. What else? List of God's wants. We have philosophy. We have theology. Life lessons. God's mentality. Say more. Good. So I won't torture you on this subject either, but you're on the right track. So the Torah is God's wisdom. God is telling us about himself in the Torah. Some of what God is telling us about himself is his desires, the commandments. Some of it is theology. Some of it is prophecy. Some of it is philosophy. But it's all God's wisdom manifest in the Torah. Now, what is, other than desire, what is the next deepest, most profound component of the person? The totality of the being, intellect. Intellect is the next highest dimension of the being, of the human being, right?
What was the answer to the mezuzah question? Did we get there?
Yes, at its core, the mezuzah is God's desire. God wants us to put a mezuzah up.
Okay.
Now, we also have reasons for that, but that's not the core of it. That's already window dressing, which is important, but not the core of it. The core of it is God says, put up a mezuzah, we put up a mezuzah. God says, keep Shabbos, we keep Shabbos, etc. God's wisdom is the Torah. When my father went into the Rebbe before his bar mitzvah, the practice was that young boys would go and receive a blessing from the Rebbe, and the practice was the Rebbe would, the bar mitzvah boy would give a talk at their bar mitzvah on some Torah concept related to bar mitzvah. So my father went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, so what are you going to speak about? So my father said he's going to speak about the topic of which hand the tefillin is supposed to go on. So in the Shema, it says that you should, it should be a sign, you should tie it as a sign upon your arm and as a sign between your eyes. And in Hebrew, arm is spelled yad cha with a hey, which changes the meaning of the word to yad kea, to the weaker arm. So if one's a righty, you put that tefillin on your left hand. If you're a lefty, you put your hand on your tefillin on your right hand. Now, what happens if you're ambidextrous? So the Jewish law discusses this. So my father explained that this was the topic that he was going to speak about. What happens if somebody's missing an arm, right? Let's say they were a righty and now they only have, and they had their left arm severed. Are they still obligated to put the tefillin on their right arm? So on and so forth. These many interesting discussions that go on. So the Rebbe asked my father in Yiddish, he said, "Was is as einer hat nicht kein Kopf? What happens if somebody doesn't have a head?" So my father said, he answered in Yiddish, very innocently, "Es kann nicht sein, it can't be." So the Rebbe asked him again, "Aber was is as einer hat nicht kein Kopf? What happens if someone doesn't have a head?" My father answered again, "Es kann nicht sein, it's not possible." So the Rebbe asked him a third time, and he answered a third time, and the Rebbe smiled to him. So what's the meaning there? Maybe the Rebbe had a specific instruction for my father to use his head in a certain way, I don't know. But the reason why I'm telling you the story is that a person could, God forbid, be lacking a leg, an arm, 2 legs, 2 arms. You can be lacking a lot of different things, but if you don't have a head, you're not a person. The very essence of being a person means you have an intellect. The whole system operates from there. God manifests himself. God's actual manifestation takes place through the Torah. The opening word of the 10 Commandments, Anochi, which means I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. The word Anochi, the Medrash tells us, is an acronym for four Aramaic words, which is Ana, Nafshi, Ksavis, Yehavis. God says, I have placed my soul into writing. So God says, you want to know me? Read the Torah. Torah is God's wisdom. It's knowing God. So we have the commandments of the Torah, which is God's will, and we have the Torah itself, which is God's wisdom. And when we study Torah and we fulfill God's commandments, we access the channels of the divine manifestation and create connection with God. And it's not just a connection that is abstract, it's a connection of knowing. It doesn't mean we understand, but it's knowing because we now have intimacy with the divine. That's knowledge. Parenthetically, when the Torah tells us about the first act of intimacy in the Torah, it uses the word knowledge. Adam yada es Chava ishtay, and Adam knew Eve, his wife. Because intimacy is an act of knowing, not intellectual knowing. Connection on the deepest of levels, awareness, realness, authentic experience. There's nothing more profound. So when we study Torah and fulfill God's commandments, we know God. We bring into our consciousness this unbelievable connection with God's essence in a level of knowing, which, by the way, when we do a mitzvah the right way, when we study Torah the right way, you can actually experience this. Not even emotionally, just in the very essence of who you are. You can know that God is real. You can't necessarily explain it, but you can know God is real. And that's because we are actually connecting with God in that moment. We're bringing into our very being this higher manifestation of the divine. This thing that we call faith now becomes knowing. We're nurturing the faith to the point that it becomes real to us. Does this make sense? Let's read it in the text. Let's go back to the bottom of page 18. We'll read through the text. Drawing down this divine light so that there can be a sustaining, a nurturing of faith, that is accomplished through the study of Torah and the fulfillment of God's commandments. Regarding which the verse says, let us make man in our likeness and image. The 248 commandments are the 248 organs of the king. Bechinas Adam, the dimension of Adam, Adam le'elyon, like the Most High, in the likeness of the Most High. which is the drawing down of the 248 flows from the dimension of the divine that's known as encompassing all worlds. In general, the 248 positive commandments are divided into three categories: Yamin, Usmol, ve'emtza, right, left, and center. Ve'hem Torah, va'avoda, ugemilas chasadim, they are Torah study, prayer, and acts of kindness. Why do they correspond accordingly? Torah hu shmois v'shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Torah is the names of God. The middle is Torah study. The middle being the names of God. Koreh b'Torah, one who reads the Torah. The word to read the Torah also means to call out. When we read Torah, we're calling out God's name. Like one calls another by a name. Right? So by learning and studying Torah, we are calling God by his name. So that's the center. Torah is the dimension of Tiferes. It's the center beam that connects everything. Ugemilas chesed zutstaka, acts of kindness, which refers to charity. What is the act of charity? Lahachis ruach shvalim. We lift up, we give life to the spirit of those that are of a low nature, meaning they may be in a bad place, an emotionally bad place, they're feeling spiritually low or materially low. So when we do an act of kindness, just as the act of kindness lifts up the one that is low, in a similar way, we activate from below a response from above. This is a principle in Kabbalah that there are two, in every relationship, there are two flows, right? In any relationship, overly stated, in every interaction, there's a higher and a lower, right? We want something from the other. We have a bid for connection to the other. That could be the man to the woman to the man, a friend to a friend, whatever it might be. So when there's a bid for connection, the one that we're asking of, or the one that's giving, is in the higher place, and the one receiving is in the lower place. When we do an act of kindness, we are, so to speak, reaching down to the one in the lower place, and we are picking them up. When we do an act of kindness, we become that lower person, that lower recipient, and in our act, we become lifted up. We create arousal, so to speak, in the divine to evoke a response, right? If the whole purpose of the mitzvah is to be able to draw down these channels of divine light, when we do a mitzvah, broadly stated, acts of kindness, all mitzvahs belong to the realm of acts of kindness, even if it's a divine mitzvah. In other words, even if it doesn't have to do with anyone else. When we're putting a mezuzah on the door, it's an act of kindness vis-a-vis the divine. So we become that lower being that in our act are lifted up, creating arousal by the divine and evoking a response from God, that God's light becomes manifest to us. And the result of that is liyas hamshacha seviv kolamin, the bechines yirida v'hashpala la'achiyas ruach shvalim, to bring down from God's encompassing light. For the purposes of our conversation right now, encompassing light means that dimension of God that's not imminent, that's not immediately available. When we do the mitzvah, we're accessing this higher dimension of God. And in becoming that lower being that's lifting ourselves up, we activate a response from God, which in turn lifts us up. In other words, it's a simultaneous event. We're both lifting ourselves up by doing what God wants, this act of kindness, and as a response, we're bringing down the flow from the divine. So that's Torah study, which is in the center, acts of kindness, which is in the right, and the third, the next page, va'avoda, and prayer, zu karbonis. Well, actually, avoda doesn't literally translate as prayer. Avoda translates as service. And service classically refers to the service in the temple. Service in the temple is sacrifice. But sacrifice today, since we don't bring sacrifice is manifest through prayer. V'avoda zu karbanis. Service is sacrifice. What is a sacrifice? A sacrifice is where you take an animal and you slaughter it for the sake of the divine name, and then you offer the blood and the fats on the altar. That's the act of sacrifice. What does it mean in prayer? So we each have an animal, the animal soul. It's the part of us that's driven to self-interest, narcissism, preoccupation with self, and so on and so forth. Me. It's the natural state of the human being, right? Don't feel bad about it. It's just how we come into this world. We're very preoccupied with self. Then suddenly along comes the soul and says, no, there's more to the world than just you. You have purpose here, right? That's what we try to do with our children. Children come out into the world, their fists clenched and screaming, me, right? I want to eat. I want a diaper change. Me. And then at a certain point, hopefully we move our children away from a me consciousness to saying, hey, wait, there's something more than me. I'm here to serve. And if I'm here to serve, I can't just do whatever my animal wants. I have to harness that animal. I have to control the animal. Sometimes I have to subdue the animal. But ultimately, this is my partner in life, this animal, and I need to train the animal to live for something more than self. Prayer does that. In prayer, what we do is through meditation, through reading the verses that talk about the glory of God in the universe, and then the glory of God in the heavenly spheres. And then we come to a place of awareness and we proclaim, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We create transformation in the physical body. In other words, the idea is not only to believe in God with our soul, not only to have this profound connection on a soul level, but to bring that into the consciousness of the person so that we wake up in the morning and we say, I am here to serve. Life is more than just my self-interest. So I have this wonderful body with the wonderful tools of the body, and I can do good things in the world. I can make the world a more godly place. But I have to inspire that. I have to inspire the animal because the animal will always remain an animal. That's just the nature of things. You can train a dog and a cat and whatever you want from today till tomorrow. It still remains a dog and a cat. Our animal is the same way. The human animal, the animal soul is the same thing. As long as we're in a physical body, the physical body has needs and has wants. And our job is to, through this process of prayer, to elevate the consciousness of the body so that the body realizes that there's more to life than just my own self-interest. Then we can harness the body to want to serve God, to want to bring a consciousness of God into the world. So prayer parallels sacrifice in the exact same way. The sacrifice takes the animal and it takes the fat and the blood. The fat is the pleasure, the blood is the passion, and it offers it to God. We do the same thing in prayer. We take our passions and our pleasures and we say, yes, I have passions and I have pleasures. I'm going to direct them to a higher purpose. So prayer is on the left. That's the work that takes place on the left. There's a lot of discipline there. The right in Kabbalah is all about giving. The left is about discipline. And the center is about harmony. So when it comes to Torah, we have harmony. We're bringing together all of the consciousness. On the right, we do acts of kindness. And on the left, we do that discipline, that analysis to harness and engage the animal soul. And this is done, Baruch Sha'amar, in the prayer of Baruch Sha'amar, where we talk about God who spoke and the world was created, Psukei de Zimra, the verses of song, where we talk about God's beauty and creation, lahagdil maduras ha'esha ava shemimata l'mayla, to increase the fiery flame of love that's inside of us. And we're going to stop here because he continues to go through prayer. We'll come back next time and we're going to continue going through this third dimension, which is prayer, which is all about the training of the animal soul. Any questions? Yes.
Made in God's image. So which part of us is like God? Definitely not animals, like our higher soul, like you know,
So it's actually, yes, the animal soul. Because what makes up the animal soul? The animal soul is made up of the body. And our body has that likeness because we have 248 organs, 365 veins and sinews. But when it gets manifest from the divine, it's actually a really important question, a really important point is that there's nothing bad about us. It's just neutral. It's neutral in the human form, but it has the potential for the greatest holiness. What you can do with your body, you can't do with your soul. Your soul can't do a mitzvah. Your soul needs your body to do a mitzvah. So when we do a mitzvah with the body becomes even greater than the soul. Again, that's why if you want to see where the end game is, look at the end game. The end game is the body, not the soul. God put the soul in the body. He created the body first. We're the only creature that was created body before soul. God formed man and then he placed the soul into him to tell us that the end game is the body. The soul serves the body.
About the I guess I always heard that the arm pushes to the heart, dedicating your mind, your eyes, and your heart to God. Now I'm confused now.
So unless you're a lefty, then you put it on the right arm. It's still opposite the heart. In other words, it still corresponds to it. It's just not as close. Yeah. It's about creating a balance, right? We have a natural strength, and where we find ourselves weak, we need to have reinforcement from the divine. Other questions? Amazing. So again, reminder, next Sunday, Tisha B'Av. The following Sunday, Rabbi Edelman, and I'll be back the week after. You're very welcome. Rock and roll. Have a great week. And if you're not on the list, please give me your name